For this episode, I decided to do a little one-episode build as a break before starting the next town. I remember spending countless hours with my friend when we were kids working towards gaining entry to this iconic old-school RuneScape location. It's the starting point to arguably the hardest non-member quest in the game, and if you haven't guessed already, today I will be building a 1:192 scale model of the Champions Guild. This building and the quest Dragon Slayer 1 were such a big part of my early RuneScape experience that I thought it was more than deserving of its own little dedicated model. As I build this model, I will be explaining some of the modeling process, as well as giving some interesting lore surrounding it. And be sure to stick around until the end, as I will be announcing the next town that I will be building at the end of the episode. I took a small piece of 1-inch thick XPF foam board and started marking out a grid of 1/4-inch squares. This translates to a 4 foot by 4 foot tile in-game, given the 1:192 scale. I decided this scale during the lumbridge series using the height of my character and some real-world comparisons. Moving over to my hot wire foam cutter, I cut the base into a circle using my custom circle jig, which is basically a board with a nail sticking out of it. I decided to make the base of the model a circle, just because I thought it would be more interesting than a square. I then began marking out the layout and dotted out the elevation changes before taking a box cutter and roughing out the shape of the hill. This guild requires players to have 32 quest points to enter, and was released on February 13th of 2001 in preparation for Dragon Slayer 1, which was released later that year on September 23rd. I used a small piece of 150 grit sandpaper to smooth out some of the rough cuts I had made earlier. I probably should have done this outside, as it made a bit of a mess on my desk. Finally, taking an X-Acto knife, I carved the stairs into place. I wanted to do a little extra surprise for this video, which involves me hollowing out the inside of the building, so make sure and stick around till the end to see that. There are several teleports to the Champions Guild. A charged combat bracelet can teleport you right to the door of the guild. The Chronicle teleports you just east of the guild, and the Portal of Champions located in the Myths Guild will also teleport you just outside the door of the guild. With the building hollowed out and glued together, it was time to move on to embossing the brickwork. So Varrock has noticeably larger stonework than lumbridge. Luckily, that's an easy thing to adjust on my Brick Cutter 1000. I just undid the nut and put 3 washers between each blade rather than 2. I marked out the doors and windows so I can avoid cutting these areas with the Brick Cutter 1000. This guild is the starting point for the iconic Dragon Slayer 1 quest, which in my opinion had one of the coolest cutscenes in it as a kid. I can still distinctly remember the first time my friend and I saw it during a sleepover, way back in 2006. I went ahead and cut out each of the windows as well. In hindsight, I cut them out a bit too large, but that's alright because it will help the last step to shine through a little bit better. I then took the Brick Cutter 1000 and scored the guild all the way around, before taking a regular ballpoint pen and tracing along each cut to further define the embossing. Next, I used an X-Acto knife to cut each brick and again traced over each of these cuts with a ballpoint pen. There are 3 NPCs in the Champions Guild, not including the member-only basement area. These include the Guildmaster, who greets every adventurer upon entry to the guild, Scavo, who sells various runite and green dragonhide armor pieces, and Valaine, who runs the general store and is the only non-member store that sells adamant plate bodies. I then added the ramparts around the perimeter of the guild. While I waited for the ramparts to dry, I moved back to the base. I mixed up some Mod Podge, acrylic paint, and fine sand to make a textured paint to coat the ground in. While that dried, I finished up embossing the ramparts and added the chicken coop wall. With the mud dried, I went ahead and added the pathways with some gray acrylic paint. Now that most of the painting on the base was finished, I decided it was time to add grass to the model. I first mixed some tacky glue with some water before taking out my static grass applicator. The grass over in this area is a little bit darker than lumbridge, so I took the light grass I used in the lumbridge model and mixed it with some darker grass I had to make a little special mix. I then put a coat of glue everywhere I wanted there to be grass before shaking the grass out of the applicator. The static grass applicator basically gives the grass a positive charge as it leaves the applicator and is then attracted to the grounded piece, causing the fibers to stand up. And while it's not a necessary tool, it definitely provides a much more convincing grass than if you were to simply sprinkle the grass on by hand. I added the final touches to the guild using some bamboo skewers to make the supporting columns on the south side of the building. While the columns were drying, I added some blues to the little section of river lum that made it onto the model. Moving back to the guild, I put a coat of Mod Podge all over the building. This will help lock in the embossing and protect the foam. Next, I prime the base as well as the Champions Guild itself to get it ready to be dry brushed later on. As the primer dried, I mixed up a small amount of epoxy that had lightly dyed blue and poured the river. I skimmed a flame over the surface to help pop any bubbles that had floated up to the top. The river looked entirely too calm, so to give it a flowing effect, I took some gloss Mod Podge and dabbed it all over before blowing on it through a straw to make the ripples. I know it looks terrible right now, but it's just one of those things you have to trust in the process. Now that the black primer is dry, it's time to dry brush the whole building. This is a very popular painting technique amongst model hobbyists, and it basically just involves dusting lighter and lighter shades of paint onto the model to highlight the raised sections of an embossing. When looking at the Champions Guild, the brickwork isn't exactly a consistent color across the building, so to mimic this, I went ahead and painted several of the blocks varying colors. Members, after attaining a Champions Scroll, which are 1 in 5,000 drops, can head down to the basement of the Champions Guild and take on some 11 different champions. Once all 11 champions have been defeated, you will receive Leon Decour's Champion's Cape, which is purely cosmetic. There are a total of 3 trees that made it onto the model. I made these by twisting a length of wire into the general shape of a tree before gluing them to a nail head to provide them with a good base, as well as an easy method of installation. I then dipped each of them into some Mod Podge to help fill in some of the wire texture. Once they had dried, I gave them a quick coat of brown paint before adding the leaves. I used what is called clump foliage. It comes in a variety of colors and is basically a colored spongy material. I've actually seen some hobbyists make their own clump foliage by literally blending up sponges and then mixing the blended sponge with acrylic paint. With the trees installed, it was time to attach the Champions Guild. I used some foam-safe superglue to do this. It's important to use a foam-safe superglue when building models like this because most superglues have a solvent in them that reacts with the foam and it will actually melt it. I almost forgot to show the finished rippling water effect. As you can see, the Mod Podge dries clear, leaving behind a texture that gives the water a bit more character. It was time to add the fence surrounding a portion of the Champions Guild. I used a plastic material called polystyrene, which you can get in a variety of shapes and sizes at most hobby stores. On the lumbridge series, I made the entire fence sections and then attached it to the model, but I wanted this fence to look a little more natural, like it does in the game. So I built it directly onto the base, one post at a time. Lastly, I carefully applied a couple coats of brown paint to the fence. It was a bit more work to do it this way, but I think it matches the actual fence in the game a little bit better. With the fence finished, it was time to make the farming plot. I used some little pebbles I had laying around to do the garden plot border. This is a bush plot, and I decided to put a redberry bush here as a nod to the Knight's Sword quest, which was always on the top of my quest list when starting a new character. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this quest, you have to give a dwarf a redberry pie in exchange for helping you make a new sword for a knight because his squire lost the original. I had a bunch of leftover ball bearings from a lab experiment I had to do for one of my classes, and I thought these little 1mm balls would make perfect red berries. This is a good example that basically anything can be used as modeling material. I sculpted several chickens out of some oven-baked clay off camera and glued them to the ends of toothpicks to give me something to hold on to while I paint them. The chicken with the extra big tail feathers is the evil chicken, which has a combat level of 159. There is a surprising amount of lore surrounding this chicken, with several origin stories detailed in the Book of Chickens, which I definitely recommend grabbing yourself a copy from the bookshelves at the Wise Old Man's house. Another interesting tidbit is prior to the random event update in 2014, you could get the evil chicken random event, which would spawn an evil chicken and it would immediately start attacking the player with extremely accurate magic attacks. Just imagine Settled getting ready for the Coliseum on his Nightmare Mode account and just getting one-shotted by the evil chicken. And there you have it, a fun quick build of the iconic Champions Guild. At the very end of this video, you'll see why I hollowed out the building, and this will give a little sneak peek on how I plan to add a little more character to the next town. That brings me to the big announcement. Based on your guys' votes, I will be building al-karid during the next series. I can't wait to figure out how to overcome all of the modeling challenges that this entirely different biome will bring. So be sure to subscribe and turn those notifications on so you don't miss it. If this is your first time seeing the channel and you want to see more, then head on over to the Tile Accurate Lumbridge series, where I model and talk about the lore surrounding the iconic town of Lumbridge. Thanks for watching.